Hi, my name is Hanspetermeyer, and I'm talking to Jack Minard here in the offices of the Comox Valley Land Trust as part of the 3 by 2 by 8 conversations about sustainability in the Comox Valley. Jack, can you tell me a little bit about the Land Trust and your background in the valley?
Well, I've lived here off and on since the 60s. I've always found this to be an incredibly attractive place, really good people here, and I've always tended to come back. I've been here full-time since 1988 now. I began my role in sort of environmentally in the valley in about 1997, and I've been working since that time in the valley looking at environmental sustainability issues. I started with the Land Trust about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, as their executive director, and I'm basically the administrator.
So what does the Land Trust do?
Land Trust looks at the legacy of lands in the valley. We work with landowners to voluntarily put protection on their property, try to really look at areas that are under threat and that have high ecosystem values, and try to put some kind of protection on those.
Right. What I know you, or the Land Trust did through, though, is this regional conservation strategy. And you've got some kind of profile around that provincially because you've actually been able to build a really interesting partnership.
We have. Land Trust published Nature Without Borders in 2008, and that document contains 26 recommendations. Mm-hmm. So our job really was, how are we going to implement these things? We don't want this just being another document that's gathering dust on a shelf. So we formed a community partnership. We brought together pretty much all of the environmental non-profit groups together around a table, formed a steering committee, and the job of that group is now to move those recommendations forward.
Okay, well that's a really nice segue into what we're going to talk about, because it's about implementation. Mm-hmm. So the 3 by 2 by 8 process is that we ask everybody 3 questions, and you're one of the people involved in the environment side of the or pillar of the sustainability matrix. So you've had a look at the draft goals and objectives for the sustainability strategy?
I'm quite familiar with the draft 4. There's a new draft that just came out yesterday, which I've only glanced at, so I'm not really familiar with what the changes are in that document. But yeah, I've been involved with what.
So what excites you about that?
Well, that the conversation is actually occurring. 10 years ago, when I first started working with the Solom River, I mean, nobody was talking sustainability. Nobody was making quantum kinds of changes in the way they looked at the world. And in 10 years, I've seen an amazing change. And to think that government and the community and all of our agencies are involved in this conversation and looking at ways to implement sustainability excites me very much.
Okay, well that brings the next question, which is, what do you see as the challenges of implementing that strategy here?
From my perspective, the single biggest challenge we have is getting all of the ecological features on the land mapped. We only have about 50% of them mapped to the kind of standard that we need to afford protection, and we really need to complete that mapping. The objectives in the sustainability draft are really not achievable. We do need to put processes in place that this data can get collected and then get shared, and that process is not even in place yet. So that's our single biggest challenge.
Okay, well, and so how do you see, for example, the Land Trust working with local government or other organizations or businesses to make sustainability a reality here?
Well, I think taking every opportunity to engage in the conversation, to share our perspectives. For example, the Chamber of Commerce has basically endorsed the kinds of concepts in Nature Without Borders. We are working with builders and architects to try and really sort of inculcate some of these concepts on a day-to-day basis. So that gets into some of the specifics. I can give you an example of the kind of things that we run into. For example, our mapping is not consistent across the jurisdictions. City of Courtenay uses a system different from the rest of the jurisdictions, and we can't seem to marry the data. So those are the kinds of sort of nitty-gritty day-to-day things that we're working on. But you know, Hans, I'm finding that everybody is working very hard at it. Everybody's very committed to this process, and I think we're actually going to get there. And I'm really impressed, of course, with Mark Holland and his group. But we're getting some really good guidance.
No, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering the 3 questions, and then we do have a little bit of time. And this is about the conversation about sustainability of the Comox Valley. It's an open conversation. There's no right or wrong here, and we're trying to encourage people to maybe think outside the box or look at things in new ways. Do you have something you want to add to the conversation? Or
well, in my conversations with a lot of people talking about these issues and trying to discover what some of the barriers are in people's minds, what is it that people need to understand what we're kind of proposing here. And I do perceive every now and then that there's some fear out there. People tend to think of sustainability as pauperizing ourselves or having to cut back in our lifestyles in ways that we're just not prepared to do. A lot of people have worked very hard to get where they are and have the things they have and have the kinds of lifestyles they have. And now we come along with a sustainability strategy, and to a certain extent we're threatening some of those things that people have worked very hard to achieve. So that kind of fear quotient does kind of have this background, and I do perceive it pretty much everywhere I go. And I guess what I'd like to say about that is that really change is the only constant, and things do change. What's difficult now is that the rate of change is very fast, and there's so much new data and so much new research that it's overwhelming. The other thing, of course, is that as we expand and look at sustainability on a regional scale, suddenly some of the rights and responsibilities with land ownership begin to take a real change. The responsibilities of land ownership start to become more important than the rights that you have. So property rights and that whole idea that this is my property and I can do what I want with it is going through some changes. That we live in a community, and we need to look at each piece of property in its commonality with sustainability issues across the region. And that's a little difficult.
Right, but to go back to the fear thing, I mean, you actually earlier mentioned that it was you were actually kind of excited about stuff rather than afraid of the change.
Yeah, well, I am personally. Of course, I thrive on change. Part of my philosophy of my life is that things do change. And, to walk into the change all the time and to keep myself educated. That's the main thing that I try to tell people, is the information is out there. It's a matter, and nobody's going to give it to you. You have to go and look for it yourself. Use your internet, use your library, use your friends and your family. Particularly a lot of the children are learning this stuff in school. And we need to grow as a community. We need to use each other and communicate with each other and keep ourselves abreast of some of the things that are the new kinds of learning that are coming out.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jack. And thank you for playing along with 3x2x8.
Thank you.
Good job.